What's up, you guys? Today we're going to be talking about champion level fighters in each UFC weight class. I'm going to be trying to operate less so on like my own intuitive gut feelings about certain guys who haven't proven very much. We're going to be operating mainly on feats that have been accomplished, detailing where the strengths of these fighters lie in conjunction with the strengths of the champions, how they offset each other, reasons why I believe certain guys would be bad matchups for the current champions. This could be interpreted as me saying nightmare matchups for each UFC champion. But I feel like that's very overdone, super oversaturated as a title. We're just going to be talking about champion level fighters for each of these weight divisions instead. That's a photo there of Matt Frivola. It makes me laugh every single time that I look at it. I couldn't really think of anything else to put on the title screen of this video. This is how that one broke dude in the friend group looks at you whenever you order wings with the pizza. This is how I used to look at my homeboy in high school whenever he pulled out that yard. So yeah, flyweight, Joshua Van is the threshold. If you match up well with Joshua Van, if I think that you beat him, you are then a champion level fighter at the flyweight division. So first, the fighter that we're going to discuss right now, it should come as no surprise to anyone. Charles Johnson is a champion level fighter at 125 pounds. He's like 35 years old, so he's a little bit old in the way of being a prospect, but he's a legitimate contender at this point, now carrying a ranking next to his name. He's just about to crack the top 10. He will be fighting with Alex Perez very soon, and if he does beat that guy, then I would say he's only one fight off from being able to challenge for the title. And the reason why this guy screams at me as a nightmare matchup for Joshua Van is because of the fact that he has knocked out Joshua Van before. As things are right now, in the very beginning of 2026, Joshua Van has an unavenged knockout loss to Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson, who continues to build up his own name off of young prospects that the organization is trying to put hype into by scheduling matches with him as a benchmark test to see if they're ready for the rankings. Charles Johnson served as like an outside the top 15 gatekeeper for some time, but he's beaten enough of these prospects to the point where it's impossible to not consider him a prospect. Every single time that the UFC got hold of a new flyweight and they couldn't really figure out a clear path for them into the rankings other than to fight Charles Johnson, they would schedule Johnson to fight with this guy, and most of the time it would backfire, and Charles Johnson would be standing over their unconscious body. If Charles Johnson is able to beat Alex Perez, I say what they do is give him a fight with Aso Mobayev as a title eliminator. That's under the notion that Aso Mobayev is able to beat Brandon Moreno as well. That would be our true number one contender at that point. This guy was losing decisions to Ode Osborne and like Rafael Estevam in 2023. And in just 2 calendar years, this dude has done a whole lot in terms of accomplishing things to make it so that he is a proper contender. And that isn't to say that Joshua Van hasn't developed since their first meeting, but I still believe in Charles Johnson as a guy who could give him a very good fight. So I will say that Charles Johnson is champion level as things are right now. Secondarily, we're going to discuss Ramazan Temirov, who out of all of the upcoming prospects that Charles Johnson was match-made with, who he chinned or beaten fights over 3-round decisions, Ramazan Temirov is kind of like the one who got away because not only did he not get knocked out by Charles Johnson, he actually won via unanimous decision against Charles Johnson through controlling the cage and with his grappling. Which, I mean, I think it's a feat in itself because we didn't really talk much about it, but Charles Johnson is a pretty good wrestler. All things considered, that's how he got back into the Lonnie Kavanaugh fight. He got significant control time over Azat Maxim, who seemed like he was going to be something in this division. I mean, Mitch Raposo also was able to wrestle that guy, but at the time, that was actually a pretty cool feat. Him wrestling a undefeated Kazakh prospect to a decision. I thought he was going to do the same thing to Ramazan Temirov. Ramazan Temirov, though, the reason why we haven't heard his name at all is because he tested positive for a tainted supplement. I don't really know the full range of him being a cheater. I know that he had positive tests in the Charles Johnson fight and also going into his fight with Aso Mobayev. That's the reason why he caught the ban. I'm not sure if it was something any more dishonest than what he said. He was in Thailand and he got hurt in training, and so he took a tainted supplement unknowingly to heal from his injury. We only have 2 showings from Ramazan Temirov in his UFC career, against Charles Johnson, where he was able to win, which is a great accomplishment, and then a fight that he was able to finish against CJ Vergara. CJ Vergara, who, I mean, is a debut opponent. He's not competing at the very highest level, and that's kind of being nice. It may be too soon to tell, but on the basis of him having grappling that I feel like could neutralize the boxing offense of Joshua Van if he's allowed to get going with it, and some pretty nice striking himself, I think that he might have what it takes to be champion as things are. He just got to stop pissing hot for real. He just hasn't faced real adversity in this division. He kept Charles Johnson contained inside of the clinch for pretty much the entire duration of their fight. If he does go down on one of these scraps or he gets hurt really badly, it would be really interesting to note whether or not he has the capability to get himself back in the fight and to get things back on track. Pretty untested. I mean, this is probably going to be like one of the greenest prospects that I will say is champion level through any of the weight classes, but he shows a lot of promise for the future. Of course, now we're going to talk about Tatsuro Taira, and if Joshua Van would have got worked by Pantoja on the ground, it's pretty safe to assume that Tatsuro Taira could exploit the same weakness that Joshua Van may or may not have. He has a takedown defense, yes, but as far as his grappling goes, I saw something like Joshua Van started grappling about like 5 months before his pro debut, and that makes it even more incredible how well he's able to stop shots off of people, but whenever he does actually get to the ground and inside of situations where he's forced to scramble, forced to dedicate energy to working to get up, forced to maintain bottom control so that he's not getting his guard passed, will he be able to do that against a guy who's been grappling for a larger portion of his life, like Tatsuro Taira, like Alexandre Pantoja? We were going to find out, but God had other plans. Early stoppage or not, I've never seen Brandon Moreno get shut out the way that he did against Tatsuro Taira. That was pretty magnificent. And considering MMA math, if you want to say Joshua Van beat Brandon Royval beat Tatsuro Taira, therefore Joshua Van would beat Taira, that's never held up anyways, but I would say that loss to Royval was necessary for Tatsuro Taira's development. And I would say this new revamped version of Taira would absolutely maul the version of himself that did lose to Brandon Royval whenever he was still undefeated. It seems like Tatsuro Taira's progression has been kind of exponential as opposed to just linear, especially considering that his striking seems to be developing too, and that jiu-jitsu is really wicked. It may be the best in the division. Things have developed with Alexandre Pantoja as well. I think that he's going to end up being okay. He said that he's not going to have to undergo surgery for the elbow injury that he sustained at UFC 323. I don't know if they will give Manel Kape the chance to fight with Joshua Van before him, but I don't imagine him being washed up per se upon his return. He said that he's targeting a summer Q3 of 2026 comeback, and I'm believing at this time that he will be 36, but if he does fight with Van, his only mental hurdle is going to be overcoming the injury and going into this fight week not being the champion anymore, instead of like actually being able to reminisce over a finishing sequence that involved Joshua Van laying him out cold. That did not happen. I pray desperately that the sun has not set on Alexandre Pantoja being champion of this division, because this is one of my favorite fighters. Horrible is it that it even happened to him in the first place with like the dislocation, but I'm just grateful for the fact that it wasn't a lot worse and something that required like a procedure and a longer layoff time. And then the last guy that we're going to talk about in this division, Manel Kape. Kape slept the fighter Van put on what people call the fight of the year in 2025 in less than 5 minutes, and I think that counts for a lot. In a pure boxing affair, it could be that nobody is messing with Manel Kape at this division. This guy's hitting hard, man. There's something to be said about the fact, I mean, people wanted to make their asterisk next to his wins over Asom Abayev and Bruno Silva because of the fact that he committed fouls leading up to both of these fighters getting TKO'd, but he's been consistently TKOing the top of the division as far as the talent that he's been match made with goes, and like, I think stylistically, he has the most fun matchup with Joshua Van out of any of the other guys you could give a fight with him, and that's even including Pantoja, who I want to see recapture the title. I think that watching these two dudes just have a slugfest and try to knock each other out would be more interesting than Joshua Van maybe getting his grappling exposed by guys who are better at jiu-jitsu than he is. Part of me kind of did want Alexandre Pantoja to have a longer layoff so that we could see Manel Kape versus Joshua Van as something to do in the meantime. They were talking about potentially getting scheduled at UFC Houston. I would have liked that, and I can't even act like I wouldn't have liked that. But there's a serious risk that you do run in having Manel Kape knock out Joshua Van at that point, and then Alexandre Pantoja doesn't get to avenge the loss that he took at UFC 323. So aside from the fact that that would be taking place on a fight night, not even like a proper numbered card, I understand them choosing to not go through with that. At least give Alexandre Pantoja time to give an update on his condition before you go ahead and just schedule another contender to fight with Joshua Van. But part of me really does just want to see this matchup. No matter like how it takes place, no matter who holds a belt, whether it's for a number one contendership spot, I kind of want to see Manel Kape versus Joshua Van at some point down the line. Even though Manel Kape is quite frequently getting injured going into these fight buildups, he seems to be in his fighting prime. Joshua Van is likely not in his prime yet, as he's still developing as a martial artist, but he's at the peak of his hype right now for whether or not it grows any more than it does. And he does have a lot of ability as things are, so I would love to see him match up with Manel Kape just to see how that fight actually does play out. I'm not sure who else agrees. So now we talk about bantamweight with Petr Yan as a champion. We're going to be talking about fighters who I think match up well with Petr Yan stylistically, who could potentially pose a threat to him holding the title, and who I think would just outright beat him. All right, so Umar Nurmagomedov is going to be the first guy who we're going to be talking about here. I think that Umar was and still is a worse matchup for Merab than Yan, and that is a healthy Umar Nurmagomedov. If anything, the rematch between Petr Yan and Merab Dvalishvili just demonstrated how hard the cranium of Merab Dvalishvili is, since both of these fighters did break their hands in their fight against Merab. People want to establish some type of skill ceiling on Umar Nurmagomedov, and they're doing that without factoring in that Merab has a vibranium skull, and that not being able to perform to your fullest capabilities because you got injured in the fight against Merab Dvalishvili, it's not overly significant. There's been many other instances of fighters breaking their hands in certain matchups, like Usman versus Khamzat Chimaev. That was a very close fight, and people thought that Kamaru Usman even won. There's still like a debate out on whether or not Kamaru Usman was winning that fight by the time that it ended. That's a serious way to nerf a fighter, is have them break one of their hands in a fight, especially if it's early on, like both of these fighters actually did break their hands. It's like round 1, round 2. Umar Nurmagomedov broke his hand in round 2 against Merab. I think that if he does stay healthy through the entire duration of his scrap with Petr Yan, and against Merab Dvalishvili as well, he could beat both of those fighters just like he beat Mario Bautista. And that's down to a simple formula. The recipe for making a champion is skill meeting experience, and that being paired with coaching that produced champions in the past. Khabib is a super weapon for any of these Dagestan fighters who are actually about their business. Maybe less so in the case of like Tagir Ulanbekov, because he just doesn't have the makings of a varsity athlete. But Umar, Usman, Islam, they definitely do, and that's the reason why they're so dominant in their respective divisions. Umar Nurmagomedov has always had the skill set, but now having fought with Merab Dvalishvili in a championship fight, compounding that with wins over Corey Sandhagen and Mario Bautista, and a fight to take place with Deiveson Figueiredo at UFC 324, he's going to be okay. By the time that he gets back into a title scenario, I think that he'll be able to win a belt with minimal difficulties this time, just because there's so many things that are working for him, and I really do believe in my heart that he is probably the best fighter at 135 pounds right now. Next, we're going to be talking about Merab Dvalishvili, and I think that they're likely going to give Merab an immediate title rematch for Petr Yan's belt, which would make sense since he did defend it so much, 4 times in 1 year. He's definitely owed the ability to slide for himself after all that he's done to progress this division forward, after all the fights that he's taken and won in 2025 and in 2024 as champion. I always imagined Merab Dvalishvili losing his belt through some type of finish, and whatever fight that marked the end of his title run, I thought he would either be getting knocked out or subbed. So to watch him just get masterclass for 25 minutes and get his face beaten into a bloody pulp kind of left me feeling a little bit unsatisfied. Not necessarily like it wasn't a definitive victory for Petr Yan, who did beat him, but it just didn't take place in the way that I had imagined it. And I know, like, who am I? But to me, this could be a similar story to Magomed versus Pereira 1. Even though he's not leaning on it to make excuses, Merab Dvalishvili, I'm sure 4 weight cuts in 1 year and an hour and 15 minutes worth of octagon time going into this last fight that also took 25 minutes that he ended up losing. There's no possible way that that level of activity was something that did not matter, or have any type of bearing on the outcome of the fight that took place at UFC 323. Painting my own storyline onto this division, I always thought that it was going to be Merab's destiny to defend until the Umar rematch, and then he would lose to him for the plot. So I mean, like, I don't know. Petr Yan getting the belt in the meantime is just kind of like, for one, something that I did not expect at all. And as I said before, kind of a linear move for the title, because it's not in the hands of a finisher, or a guy who finishes fights. Merab Dvalishvili, Umar Nurmagomedov, and Petr Yan each have the same level of potency in terms of being able to put these guys away in the top of the division. I acknowledged before that it's likely down to the average skill level of fighters within the top 10 of bantamweight, but on a lot of different levels, those fighters are very similar in terms of their processes and the way that their fights often go. Next, we have Aiemann Zahabi to talk about at 135 pounds. The window for him is closing due to age, and he's completely eliminated from the title picture if he does get KO'd between now and fighting for the belt, but I think he's at the level that's required in order to beat Petr Yan. Going back to what I said about Merab, Umar, and Piotr not each having a lot of finishing capabilities, I also think that Aiemann Zahabi is exceedingly durable, and he would be able to make it to the end of a 25-minute fight with Petr Yan without getting finished. And he has the cardio to last 5 rounds and to find some way to win. He's a bit random as a fighter to have made it this far into the 135-pound division, but I mean, he's convicted to become champion And weirder things have happened in a 38-year-old bantamweight capturing a title in the UFC, and this being like their first time doing it. Next, we're going to be talking about Sean O'Malley, and I really do think that Sean O'Malley would win this rematch. I don't think that Jan can defeat a Sean O'Malley who's been making strides to develop his striking and grappling since the first fight. If Sean pieces up and KO Song Yadong within 3 rounds, I have no reason to doubt the fact that he would be able to win this rematch either. It's not really a question in my mind whether or not he could recapture the title, and the organization is for sure going to lean that way as far as scheduling and who they give the shot to next. All Sean O'Malley really needs to do is knock out Song Yadong. If he does that, and if Petr Yan is able to retain the title against Merab Dvalishvili, they're for sure going to book this rematch, and that's like kind of guaranteed. If Merab does beat Petr Yan, then they're probably going to give the rematch to Umar. But in the event that we do have Yan holding on to the title through the latter half of 2026, I really do like Sean O'Malley's chances of becoming champion again. It's possible though that a pure striking match after 2 fights that he's taken with a wrestler who he really had to work his grappling and preparation for would short circuit him. But I mean, if he's able to just get back to regularly scheduled programming with how he was tuning up fighters before Merab Dvalishvili and how free and flowy he looked on the feet whenever he would strike against lesser competition, even the higher level competition that he knew wouldn't shoot on him every 30 seconds, I think that Sean O'Malley is still probably the most lethal striker in this division and probably the most dangerous striker in the division too. And I'm just going to throw this one out there. I'm not sure who else is going to agree with me in having this take, but I think that Aleksandre Topuria is a fighter who is champion level at 135 pounds. And I think that Topuria has a bid to be considered a champion level fighter for the same reason that Umar does. He has a great lifeline in Ilya as a head coach. He has basically the same skill set as his little brother too, even though it's just a little bit less refined. But it will become more refined as he gets more experience through this division. And already being so complete, it seems like the only thing that's really missing from the equation that we've discussed before is the experience, and that'll just require him taking more fights. It's definitely up for debate based on the things that we've seen demonstrated by both fighters, whether or not Aleksandre Topuria or Petr Yan has better boxing for this division. But with what we've witnessed so far, I would say that Aleksandre Topuria has Petr Yan beat on many aspects of the stand-up, except for potentially output. But that's definitely not something that can't be negotiated before he does reach the opportunity to be able to fight for the title. This is going to be the battle of the high guards if it does end up unfolding Topuria versus Yan. I also do believe that Aleksandre Topuria does have the wrestling to deal with the Petr Yan, even if he does have to sweat a little bit. I'm choosing to place a lot of significance on his last win over Beksat Almakhan. I really don't believe that that's misplaced. We do have to remember Umar's run began with beating Beksat Almakhan as well, and Aleksandre Topuria's win over that fighter was a lot cleaner and better in general than Umar Nurmagomedov's, and this is years removed from Beksat Almakhan fighting with Umar in his debut, so he's much more matured as a UFC fighter. Aleksandre Topuria winning the fight the way that he did against Beksat, that's significant. And then the last fighter that we're going to be talking about is Vinicius Oliveira. I guess he could do this. He's basically bantamweight Yuri, Morales, or Dricus. It just kind of depends on how you want to frame it. He just needs to increase his finishing aptitude and tighten up his defense. If he's able to do that, if he's able to start stringing together all finishes until he's able to fight for the belt, then he'll make himself undeniable. I think it's very possible that he does blow Mario Batista's head smooth off. He's been on record saying that nobody in the division wants to fight him, and that's very difficult for him to get fights. I have a feeling that he's not as deficient in all the areas that people consider weaknesses that he has. And I don't think that it's going to be as simple as him getting his grappling exploited as not being at the level of the top contenders of bantamweight. And that's the reason why he gets shut out from the title picture, or him having bad cardio. There's a good chance that he is ready for 5 rounds. I mean, we'll find out as he's going to be main eventing an Apex card against Mario Batista. And that's kind of the litmus test as far as seeing how well prepared he is to take on the rest of the division up at the top of the rankings. If he passes that test in flying colors and he knocks out Mario Batista, then we have a guy on our hands, a serious contender. Next, we have featherweight to discuss. And just within the next month, we're going to potentially have a new champion. Or this guy's going to be facing off with a guy who he's fought once before. So, I mean, if Diego Lopes is able to take the belt off of Volk, then completely disregard everything that we're going to be talking about right now. It'll be Diego Lopes as the champion, and I guess I'll have to redo this section of the video. We're going to be talking about the toughest matchups for Volkanovski. As things are, he is a champion of 145 pounds, and we're going to be addressing this division accordingly. So naturally, we are going to be discussing Diego Lopes being a champion level fighter in this division, a guy who I think could beat Volkanovski. The organization seems to agree as well, and that's the reason why they rescheduled this fight. And to be fair, he made the fight with Volk closer than anyone else at 145 pounds had, who didn't beat him except for Max in the second fight. But we got a clean drop out of Diego Lopes. There was like the knee that Volkanovski hit after the head kick landed, but Diego Lopes dropped Volkanovski at the very end of round 3 with hands. Diego Lopes is going to have a much better game plan going into a rematch. Hopefully he's working on his movement to be able to corral Volk into the corner of the octagon to let off meaningful combos. Whenever he was able to pin Volk into a side of the octagon, he was able to score with a straight punch. It didn't even land flush and it still dropped him. That could be down to the deterioration of Volkanovski's chin, but if he's able to produce moments like that earlier on into a round, he could potentially make them count for more. And I really do believe in Diego Lopes as a fighter who could become champion of 145 pounds. And in doing that, I believe he would be a benefactor of the featherweight division because of how active he would keep the belt. He put on some really big fights too, and I think that they would produce decisive outcomes, and a lot of them would happen to be finishes as well. Next, we're going to be talking about Movsar Evloev. This guy, he could have had the belt for 2 years. Like, since 2023... he could have had the belt for 2 years. At the time of him fighting Arnold Allen and Diego Lopes, he was ready to challenge for the title. But he just didn't stay active through 2024, didn't fight at all in 2025. He just been digging in his butt. I don't know where this dude has been. And now it's to the point where even though he's ranked number 1 in the division, his presence in the UFC doesn't matter. Like, whether or not he was actually like part of the roster, it wouldn't make a difference with the current landscape of 145 pounds. Because as things are right now, he would need to fight 1 to 2 more times before it would make sense to put him in a title situation. Maybe unless he fought Lerone Murphy, which, I mean, even still, it could be argued that that's not that significant of a win because Lerone Murphy just beat Aaron Pico to be ranked number 4 in the division. It's not like Pico is Gian Silva. And the idea of Movsar Evloev fighting 2 more times in a single 365-day time block, it's unfathomable to me and probably you who's watching the video too. This guy would be equivalent to Khamzat Chimaev as a champion as well. Probably worse than Khamzat since he's less active than Khamzat Chimaev. How do you find a way to be less active than Khamzat Chimaev? Not even make any sense. But I mean, with that being said, his skills are undeniable, and he would likely be able to win a unanimous decision over any champion in the history of this weight class except for Ilia Topuria. Don't get it twisted, my man. People used to say that Ilia Topuria left 145 pounds so he didn't have to fight with Movsar. Hell no. You trim. You know I gotta mention my boy Steve Garcia at this point in the video. The physicality of this fighter paired with his aggression, it makes him a horrible matchup for anyone who would hold the belt. And that's like whenever he challenged for it. Whether it be Diego Lopes, whether it be Volkanovski, or anybody else. It's a tough fight whenever we're talking Steve Garcia, every single time. Steve Garcia has been chinned before, and I think that this would be what is required to defeat him because, I mean, he's pretty much ungrappleable. And that does go back to him having that 6-foot frame and a lot of aptitude in terms of the grappling and the stand-up, clinch work. Also on the ground, too, he has some pretty solid jiu-jitsu. Oddly enough, fighters like Nerd and Becca were able to hurt this guy on the feet. But I mean, this was a long time ago. Also, once upon a time, Mahashate at 145 pounds was able to knock this guy out. It's weird fighters, dude. But for some reason, with as easy as Steve Garcia has made fights up until this point look, I don't see him getting into much closer fights as he rises through the top 15. I think that the path towards the belt for him is kind of beaten. All he would need to do is fight. I think Youssef Zalal is going to be what's next for him. And then after that, they match him with somebody else in the top 5. Maybe even like a Lerone Murphy if Movsar doesn't come back and fight him in time. I think that Steve Garcia would do bad things to both of those fighters. Next, we have Gian Silva, who is a guy who, I mean, look, man. I think that Gian Silva has a lot of potential. And most of the time, you're not going to stay undefeated throughout your UFC career. But of all the different fighting nerds who lost fights, like, Gian Silva definitely got it the worst. And that boy Gian Silva is for sure, like, prim-locked, like rust, from holding the title at 145 pounds. If it just so happens that Diego Lopes is the fighter who is able to capture it over Volk, we know how that goes. I think that Gian Silva is a ways off from surpassing Diego Lopes at any point in the near future. I'm not even sure if he would win 7 rematches with that fighter, as things are currently. Silva may have the wrestling as his Achilles heel, and if that's the case, he could get 50-45'd or subbed by a fighter like Aljo or even like Pitbull, dude. Like, anyone who's able to complete that same body lock takedown and maintain mount over him gets free rounds, or the potential to sub him, or the opportunity to produce enough damage to force a doctor stoppage. It's really just a question of whether or not he does land a blessed left hand to knock out his opponent before they're able to take him down. And I think that for a lot of different matchups within the top 5, top 10 of this division, the answer to that is yes. I think that Gian Silva definitely has a path to the title. That's just going to entail him shutting down the wrestling offenses of his opponents, which people are now going to know to heavily rely on to win fights against him, because it doesn't seem like his grappling is where it needs to be in order to compete with the top of this division. That could just be another thing speaking volumes to Diego Lopes's acumen as a grappler, but I think that Gian Silva possesses like a third of the skill in the grappling that he does in the striking and the stand-up. But I can't imagine that there is any other fighter in this division that same offense that he was landing against Diego Lopes wouldn't be effective in knocking out completely clean. Diego Lopes just has a legendary chin, so I mean that's just what it is. And I don't think that should detract too much from the skill set of Gian Silva as a striker. I think the grappling is more something to be concerned over, but we'll see what the future holds for him. Finally, we discussed Youssef Zalal, high-level Brazilian jiu-jitsu and striking that people sleep on because of one fight that he had with Calvin Kattar that was boring. I think that out of all the guys that we've discussed, he's least likely to hold the title. His claims to respect before submitting Emmett was a few cheeky wins over Samid and a decision win to Kattar and then losing to Ilia too. He was at one point the only guy who Ilia Topuria did not finish in the UFC. I think that's actually still true. Like, he's the only one to have gone to the cards with Ilia Topuria. I think that this dude is more likely just going to be fodder to propel a fighter like Steve Garcia into the top 5 of this division. But if he is somehow able to get past a challenge like that, then all of the hopes and aspirations that I would have for a mean machine would go into a Youssef Zalal. I haven't rooted against this fighter at any point through his rise in this division, but I think that Volk likely torches this dude with all things considered, and maybe even the other grapplers of the top 5 of this division as well. Next, we'll be discussing lightweight, where Ilia Topuria is champion, and this is going to be an entire collection of every single fighter at 155 pounds who does defeat Ilia Topuria in a mixed martial arts competition. Yeah, I really got nothing, dude. I know that, like, some people would expect me to say, well, I mean, Orman could... No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. Patty, Gaethje, they're having their fight for the McDonald's toy interim belt that will be wrapped around one of their waists at UFC 324. It doesn't matter. All of them get chinned by Ilia Topuria within 2 rounds. And, like, I'm very confident in that. The sun is going to rise tomorrow. Ilia Topuria knocks out every single top contender at 155. Next, we're going to be discussing the welterweight division that, oddly enough, actually does have better matchups for, a champion who could be argued to be just as dominant as Ilia Topuria, no matter whether or not he's competing at lightweight or welterweight. We're going to be talking about champion-level fighters at 170 pounds who I think could give Islam Makhachev, if not a run for his money, a close and competitive fight. There's going to be 2 fighters that we're going to be talking about. The first one is going to be Michael Morales. Morales, who is a freaky ab bull, and it just so happens isn't actually even undefeated. He lost a pro MMA fight whenever he was 18. The internet sleuths did some digging and they found a video of him getting elbow TKO'd while getting triangle choked. It's kind of flagrant the way that the guy was doing him in this video and the way that the entire internet started reproducing the content once it did release. But I don't really care, dude. I enjoy rooting for Michael Morales. I think that he's very impressive in the cage, and he enjoys physical advantages over the entire division. I think that it would be his physicality that would pose a very large threat for Islam Makhachev, as getting takedowns wouldn't be as easy as they would over a fighter like Jack Della Maddalena or like anybody else in the division. And I like Morales for his bulldog disposition towards pocket exchanging with whoever he's match-made with, no matter whether or not they come from grappling backgrounds or if they're strikers themselves. He has no reservations as far as inserting himself into pocket exchanges goes. And he has the knowledge of positions in terms of the wrestling to be able to get up whenever he is taken down. Nobody can pose the same level of threat in the grappling that a fighter like Islam Makhachev can, so we can see if these things will still hold true in a fight with that guy. But Islam is still a man at the end of the day, and he can get knocked out because it has happened before. No grappler is at his level, but being relative in ability while having KO power and boxing may be enough. I would never say something like Michael Morales is a bad matchup for Islam Makhachev. But whenever comparing their skills, I would say that Michael Morales is at least relative to some aspects of Islam Makhachev. I think he's a better striker. I think he's more powerful, all things considered. And I think that with the physical advantages that he does have, there's a shot that he's able to get up at least once or twice to maybe get some more combos off that could be meaningful in finishing the fight. And I think it would be a good fight, too, if we were to watch both of these dudes face off. And I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I think this is probably the best that we have as far as the belt changing hands in this division. If not for the next two that we're going to be discussing, who is Ian Cherry Berry, Ian Machado Squarey, Ian Sperry. So this is the thing about him that makes me a little bit less confident. And whenever I say a little bit, I mean like a lot less confident in Ian Garry than I am in Michael Morales and being able to beat Islam Makhachev in a prospective fight between the two. Ian Garry has to outskill Islam for 25 minutes because that's the way that he wins fights. He is just technically better than his opponent for the entire duration of a 3 or 5 round fight. That's going to be very hard to do against Islam Makhachev. Beating Islam the same way that he beat Belal Muhammad, I don't think he can do that. Islam Makhachev isn't going to have any weaknesses to exploit, and I don't think that Ian Garry, in terms of being on a mission to keep the fight on the feet and outpoint Islam Makhachev, is going to be doing anything better than Islam as far as being able to stop the takedown, being able to recover to his feet if the fight does get down there. I think he low-key gets choked, man. I think that he gets stopped against Islam Makhachev. The only thing that really favors Ian Garry in this fight is his frame, but he doesn't have the physicality to go with it, you know? Michael Morales is big and strong. Ian Machado Garry is just kind of gangly. And as far as the assertion that I made on prior occasions, being that taller opponents are easier to grapple, I think that Islam Makhachev is going to have no issues with tying this dude up on the ground if he is able to get the fight down there. Ian Garry probably gets diffed in the grappling. He gets his stand-up neutralized, and that's unless he goes for it. And in that case, there is a chance that he does knock out Islam Makhachev, because even though Islam isn't a small welterweight, he's not a large one, and a range advantage is a range advantage. Ian Garry used to be a dude who was able to display the capabilities to knock out certain opponents, and that seems to have just kind of left, but I guess anything's possible. You know, it's a fight. These guys are slinging 4-ounce leathers at each other. The mainly compelling thing about this matchup would be that it would be another go at Islam Makhachev's own Ireland versus Russia storyline. Khabib had, of course, the matchup with Conor McGregor. This would be like the Disney Channel version of that matchup, because there would be less on it from the standpoint of both of these fighters having genuine animosity for each other. Now we discuss middleweight, where Khamzat Chimaev is currently the belt holder. All right, this is a take that people have been mean to me on the internet over, because I posted some short content dedicated to talking about how, dude, I low-key believe in Sean Strickland. I think the chance of him recapturing the title on the basis of the fact that he matches up with Khamzat Chimaev better than pretty much anybody else in the division is higher than 0, and it's significantly higher than 0. I've seen a lot of different people make the retort that he doesn't get past Fluffy, or that Khamzat Chimaev just grounds him out on the floor and that it's easy for him to do that. And yes, there's a potential for both of these things to be true, as counters to the claim that I make. Sean Strickland, he could do this. And largely all we really have to go off of are tweets that he's made where he said that, I mean, yeah, Khamzat Chimaev was able to sub him. He did self-profess that in an interview with the Schmo. But he did say that, like, after a while, Khamzat Chimaev would tire and he would get the better of these wrestling scrambles and be able to dominate certain positions. And at the very least, he was hanging with him whenever Khamzat Chimaev visited Extreme Couture to train. I have confidence in Sean Strickland because of the fact that he doesn't wrestle offensively hardly ever, but whenever he is taken down, he's very good at not accepting positions and scrambling to get back to his feet. And that's like something that he's always been pretty good at. And if we're talking about matchups with anybody else in the division, I have full belief in Sean Strickland's counter-grappling abilities. I don't think that any other grappler at 185 pounds would be able to beat Sean Strickland through out-wrestling him for the entire duration of a 3 or 5 round fight. It just wouldn't happen. It's just that Khamzat is an entirely different level, but if it's not him, I don't think that my faith resides with anybody else being able to take the belt off of Chimaev. And that's just because that guy literally is the final boss. He's MMA Mike Tyson. Next, we have light heavyweight, where Alex Pereira is champion of this division. And there's only one fighter that we're going to be talking about for this division, dude. It's Azamat Murzakonov. I have no faith in Magomed Ankalaev recapturing the title off of Alex Pereira. Maybe if he waits 3 more years and Alex Pereira challenges again at 42. But even still, Alex Pereira is very dangerous whenever he is healthy. Carlos Ulberg, I don't think, is a serious threat for the title. Yuri Prochazka, I mean, we've been through this, it feels like. Azamat Murzakonov is the guy. He's the dude. He's the realest threat to anyone in this division. I can't imagine how Azamat Murzakonov doesn't win via knockout. Like, not TKO, not decision, like knockout against Magomed, Yuri Prochazka, Jamal Hill, Khalil Roundtree Jr., or whoever else at 205. Like, I think that Azamat Murzakonov sleeps all of those dudes, and it's bad. And I think that his greatest strength in his matchups against fighters that he is able to knock out is the thing that constantly gets him overlooked is just how unseemingly he is. Nothing outwardly screams that he's a fighter to be taken as seriously as he should be, and that's one of his greatest weapons, but also gets him snubbed for opportunities to fight up the rankings. him even getting the Rakic fight was kind of surprising. And granted, that fight didn't take place in Abu Dhabi. I'm not sure if it would even have been something on the docket. But now that he beat Rakic, he's number 6 in the division, so he has to be match made with somebody in the top 5 now, because he has momentum that's going upward. He hasn't lost ever. He's undefeated, and that's another thing to add. And his last wins have all been by knockout. So, like, this guy's a problem. He's a legitimate problem. And Alex Pereira, he needs to leave the division, the UFC, like, retire right into the sunset before the Azamat Murzakonov fight ends up falling into his lap and is unavoidable for him, because I don't think that he wins. Finally, we have the heavyweight division to discuss. Tom Aspinall is the champion, of course. We're going to be talking about champion level fighters who I think would pose a threat to Aspinall holding the title. First, we're going to be talking about Ciryl Gane, the last opponent that Tom Aspinall did face off with at UFC 321. It was less than 5 minutes, yes, but it could have very well have been the Ciryl show for 25. And just really think about it. Ciryl Gane has fought with 3 different types of UFC champions at heavyweight while developing his skills without ever leaving the top 5 of this division for the last 5 years. So, I mean, I talked about it before. You consistently give the same guy opportunities to challenge for a belt. It's like a numbers game, dude. Eventually, he's gonna get it right, whether it be up against the same opponent or a variety of different ones. There's a good chance that Francis Ngannou and John Jones were harder fights for him stylistically and just overall than his matchup with Tom Aspinall will be in a rematch, or even the first time. Granted, it didn't get ended by the foul that was committed. And with taking that into consideration, I think that I probably was just a little bit unfair to Gane in the past. He got skunked by Jones, but it's very likely that John Jones would have done pretty much the same thing to anybody within the top 10 of the heavyweight division if he did compete with any of those guys at the time that he did fight Ciryl Gane. Same thing with Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou had an infinite KO threat, worse than any other heavyweight that we've ever seen, and he was a lot more developed in his martial arts career than Ciryl Gane was at the time of fighting him. That was his first title shot. It could be that Ciryl is finally locked in, and it's his time now. Whenever they do rematch him and Aspinall, it's going to be the real C walking away with the strap in that one. And I'm not going to be mad at it if it actually does take place, and that's what goes down. Ciryl Gane has been present through many different eras of this division, and through all the different eras, he's been a top-level contender. I mean, he hasn't given us the best fights, you know? There was Volkov 2. There was even the first Volkov fight, was pretty boring. And then the last fiasco that he was involved in for the world title. But he could be living proof that a fighter isn't the composite results of his last 3 or 4 fights. I wouldn't call it cope if you were to still side with Aspinall, but I do think that it's Ciryl Gane's time. As far as that rematch getting scheduled goes, I would definitely side with Ciryl Gane to be the one to beat Tom Aspinall. I don't think that he gets knocked out as like some like revenge for the fact that he eye poked in the first one. I think that he probably just shuts down Tom Aspinall and then ends up maybe even scoring a late TKO himself. I think that he does have a lot of technical ability. I think that he's good at fighting. It's just he hasn't been able to be the best because there's just always been fighters in the division that existed over him that were just superior. So next we have Waldo Cortez Acosta. This guy is able to win a fight versus anyone in the division. Is a fighter I believe matches up well with Tom Aspinall. And it's funny because Cortez Acosta is a fighter who I would have considered something of a dud before the year 2025 anyways. In the latter half of the year, he earned the community's respect in like a month in fighting with Ante Delaya and Shamil Gaziev. Ante Delaya, who people were hyping up to be the next big thing at this weight class. Tom Aspinall, the champion, was already talking about it's very possible that this guy gets to the belt, and if he does, then he will relinquish the title so that Delaya can become world champion. And then Shamil Gaziev, who everybody memed and was just generally kind of a fan of because of internet sentiments. Waldo Cortez Acosta possesses knockout wins over both of those people. I think the way that his path to the title ends up going is if he's able to beat Derek Lewis in his next fight, he should be next in line for the title if he can also beat Alexander Volkov. I don't think that he should have any difficulties in doing both of these things. Volkov would be a harder fight, but Waldo Cortez Acosta has demonstrated himself to be pretty well versed in all different positions of the octagon. Volkov, his takedown defense looked kind of Swiss cheese in his last fight against Almeida. Almeida is kind of like one of these diet hybrid heavyweights between a light heavyweight and a true 265er. Waldo Cortez Acosta could, at the very least, do what Jailton Almeida was able to do to Volkov, but I think he can knock out both fighters. And I think that it's probably his time to do that. If he is able to accomplish this, then there'd be no question as to whether or not he should be the next one to fight for the title. Even with an existing loss over Sergey Pavlovich, it's my hope for him that he's able to avenge that at some point, but I mean, he's looking good right now. I know the organization must be happy as well for the fact that they have something for the 265-pound division after the rematch for the title that we have yet to have scheduled and have no prospective date or timeline for. There's Waldo, Cortez, Acosta, and he's just going to be up at the top of the division if he's able to continue to win. So, I mean, we'll see. He does have to get past Derek Lewis first, and that's never an easy out, but I think that he is a champion-level fighter. And then finally, we have Mario Pinto to discuss. Mario Pinto, he's young and he's unranked. So, I mean, this is me kind of going out on a limb and saying that he's ready to fight for the belt. Could be that he's not, but he does have some very technical boxing. And we thought before that he was just a boxer, but he's come off of a pretty grappling heavy performance over Renata Deniz. He was able to finish that via TKO. And it wasn't the most enthralling fight, but it was a necessary layer of his game for him to demonstrate, just so that we didn't assume that he was only a stand-up fighter and that he had no ability to grapple if the situation did call for it. I think compounding his skill in the boxing and his power, as well as his wrestling that we just talked about, is more than enough for him to become ranked. He's also 27, which, I mean, for this weight class, it leaves him with so much time. To be as far into his career as an MMA heavyweight as he is at the age of 27, it shows a lot of promise for him. I'm not going to be mentioning a fighter like Walter Walker on this list because I think that Mario Pinto has infinitely more potential to do something meaningful at this weight class. Walter Walker is a little bit too gimmicky for me to take seriously. We still don't really know what happens whenever he tries to rip a heel hook on somebody and it doesn't work. What'll he do then? Mario Pinto has the boxing and the capability to be able to finish fights on the feet, and if that is something that he doesn't want to rely on, I mean, it will likely work for as much as he wants to try to employ it. But if it doesn't, or he hits a wall, or wants to take a different approach, or the best approach in general to take would be through the wrestling, he has the option to do that. That level of versatility is something that I think will carry him far throughout this division, and I think is something that makes him a bad matchup for the champion, who people tout as being very versatile himself. So yeah, fellas, let me know who are other fighters who you think that I left off this list. Dudes, in your opinion, who would be bad matchups for the champions as things are right now. If you did make it to this point in the video, make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. I will catch you fellas in the next one. Peace out.